Sakyamuni Buddha, born in India around the 500 before Common Era, was a true revolutionary in that he was able to follow his own beliefs and ideas to achieve a higher truth, rather than just follow in the footsteps and paths of others. In this way, he can be compared with some prominent existentialists such as Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, among others, in that they all abandoned societal norms in order to focus in on their own individual to gain a clearer understanding of their world. In the following videography, I will focus on this practice of breaking off from the crowd in search of a higher truth by examining the beliefs of Fyodor Dostoevsky and of Soren Kierkegaard in comparison with Buddhist theory. I will delve into their ideas of individuality, deceit, consciousness, and truth, and how it relates to their perception of the crowd. When the Buddha, known as Siddhartha Gautama, was born, it was predicted that he would either grow up to save humanity or become another great king. His father tried to shelter him of all suffering, including sickness, poverty, death, and sadness, so that he would not be tempted to help humanity. Eventually, Siddhartha came into contact with all of these things and decided to strip himself of all representations of wealth, fame, power, prestige, and privilege, and abandoned his comfortable life in the palace in search for a higher truth. He encountered a crowd of ascetic monks who practiced asceticism in the woods, and decided to practice with them for a while. Soon after, Siddhartha realized that the path the crowd followed did have some validity and truth, but it did not possess the ultimate truth. So he decided to leave the crowd of ascetics in pursuit of his own belief, marking the second major event in his life in which he tore off from the crowd and explored a path contrary to popular acceptance. Siddhartha then isolated himself from the crowd without any feeling of regret, and focused in on his own individual and consciousness, tearing away any shred of artificiality and deceit in order to know the truth. One night, under the Bodhi tree, he achieved spiritual awakening through intense concentration and meditation. He then set out to share his understanding and wisdom with others, first going back to teach the ascetic monks. They managed to forgive him and achieved enlightenment immediately, thus proving that making sacrifices for the benefit of one's own beliefs is perfectly legitimate. Following that, Siddhartha made a speech to the Kalama people. He told them not to blindly trust any ancient texts as truth, nor use scriptures such as the Holy Vedas as a final authority to achieve enlightenment. One can only trust one's own self, and one's own self can only be known through direct, personal experiences and meditation. Fast forward a little over 2,000 years, and we see existentialists beginning to gain prominence in Europe. Soren Kierkegaard was born in Denmark on May 5, 1813. He grew up in a very religious household and was urged by his father to become a pastor. Instead, he ended up earning a PhD equivalent in philosophy. He was a man deeply influenced by the power of women, and his love affair with a woman named Regine Olsen would forever change his life and everything he ever wrote about. Although he was engaged to her at one point, he became rather melancholy and broke off the marriage. She then married someone else, disheartening him even more. Either or, Fear and Trembling, and Repetition are all works by Kierkegaard which express lament for his sorrow over his love for Regine. Though he did write a great deal, he had no desire to be famous. In fact, he avoided fame. He is usually referred to as the first existentialist philosopher, having bridged the gap between Hegelian philosophy and existentialism. Kierkegaard is also the first to have written about the idea of taking a leap of faith, and that in order to have faith, one must also possess a certain degree of doubt. Just as the Buddha left his original spiritual crowds, Kierkegaard eventually managed to tear off from his religion, having led a literary attack on the church. He died on November 11, 1855, after collapsing in the street. As a testament to his devotion to his own ideas and beliefs, he refused to receive communion from a pastor, as he could not regard this as the truth. Until his dying day, Kierkegaard stood up for his beliefs and against the flow of the crowd. Born in the same generation as Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky was born in the rough neighborhoods of Moscow, Russia, in 1821. His family was very harsh, and his father an alcoholic. In addition, his father was a doctor who worked at a hospital nearby his home, leaving the surrounding of young Dostoevsky's neighborhood scattered with landmarks that included a cemetery for criminals, a lunatic asylum, and an orphanage for abandoned infants. These patients and living examples of human suffering tormented young Dostoevsky and would forever have a great impact on his adult life. Even with all his childhood troubles, Dostoevsky was determined to be influential and famous. This is the first indication of his will to tear himself away from the norm. He found his first outlet through the Russian military school, where he became a lieutenant in the army. He tried to further his fame by writing for periodicals. At age 24, he had his first big success by writing an article called Poor Folk, which was later to be published as a book. Unfortunately, he had very little writing success after this, and was arrested at age 28 for engaging in revolutionary activity against Tsar Nikolai I. This arrest marked a pivotal point in Dostoevsky's life and in the style of his literature. He was sentenced to death as he was linked to the Petrashevsky Circle, a liberal intellectual group. This was another indication that Dostoevsky was detaching himself from the norm, this time in the political realm. He unknowingly went through a mock execution on the day he was to be shot to death, which really added to his insanity. His next 4 years were spent in exile in Omsk, Siberia, and it was during that time in which he really began to foster traditional Russian values and become adamantly anti-Western. By the time of his death in 1881, he was hailed by Russians as being one of the best writers of all times and glorified as an almost prophetic, mystical writer. Although Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky grew up in quite different societies, their experience of hardship led them to both question some fundamental aspects of the nature of life and of the human spirit, especially in examining the individual in relation to the crowd. On the point of consciousness, both novelists acknowledge that consciously isolating oneself from the crowd can allow for inherent satisfaction. Kierkegaard notes that if one is conscious of oneself and one's surroundings, then it is possible to see that the crowd renders the individual weak and irresponsible. Dostoevsky admitted that all consciousness is a sort of disease, and one cannot be deceived of anything if one is conscious. He often wished he could be more like the stupid man, unaware of his surroundings and consciousness, and just as Mother Nature had intended man to be. Buddhists would tend to agree with this existentialist view, as consciousness experiences are nothing but a bunch of imaginations, since the only realities exist within the mind. Thus, as Dostoevsky would agree, being conscious of the outside and of one's own surroundings would only muddle the mind and lead one astray from attaining understanding of the ultimate truth. These existentialists believe that in order to achieve the goal of being oblivious and carefree of one's surroundings, one must detach themselves from the crowd. One might be prompted to ask why one would want to transcend consciousness. Put quite simply, it is in order to gain a better understanding of the truth, a better understanding of the ultimate truth. Where, then, does the ultimate truth lay? In Kierkegaard's eyes, the truth cannot be seen where there is a crowd. Even if every person within the crowd possessed the same truth, the mere fact that they would be congregated would disqualify their truth as a whole, thus bringing untruth. The crowd is cowardly, as all those making up the crowd are fleeing from their own individual. Those individuals who run to the crowd are merely contributing to the cowardliness of the crowd. This brings us to the conclusion that the crowd itself is cowardly. If the presence of a crowd is untruth, then the truth can only possibly be present in the individual. Kierkegaard believes just this, that one must be their own individual to understand and to know the truth. Just as Buddhists believe every individual is capable of attaining spiritual awakening, Kierkegaard also holds true that each man is capable of knowing the ultimate truth. The individual is the ultimate governor of life and of what life means. Dostoevsky believes that it is man's intrinsic nature to want to be independent and to be his own individual, and not just be used as society's mere keys of a piano. Thus, he will sometimes make seemingly irrational decisions by breaking off from the crowd to uphold his own beliefs. This is fine, as trusting one's individuality will allow one to gain a better understanding of the truth and also to maintain a purer heart, which is necessary to have a genuine consciousness. Never should one feel the slightest regret for serving one's beliefs. This practice of sacrificing societal norms for one's own beliefs is also supported by Buddhist thought, as the ultimate truth is believed to be attained only by the individual. According to Kierkegaard, modern demoralization caused by impersonal anonymity in the press has unfortunately led many individuals astray, to cling to the cowardliness of the crowd, thus creating the need to get back to the individual. Illusions have begun to rule the world rather than the truth. Since the truth is only understood by the individual and can only be communicated by the individual, it is far more important to serve one's own ideas, to prevent oneself from betraying the truth, to profit by the illusion. In this way, it is crucial for a person to think for oneself and to trust one's own experiences in searching for the truth. Just as Dostoevsky and Buddhists believe, Kierkegaard also understands that one should feel no regret for decisions and actions made according to the validity of one's own beliefs. One area in which Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky do differ is ways in which the individual should deal with the crowd. While Dostoevsky thinks it is acceptable to resist the group and reject peaceful, reasonable, and honest things, Kierkegaard believes in taking a more subtle approach. Instead of confronting the crowd, one should try to influence others to find their path to individuality. Buddhist thought coincides more with Kierkegaard's beliefs in this regard, as they too accept that the crowd should not be confronted, but rather should be indirectly attacked by trying to influence persons on a one-on-one basis, to help to get them back in touch with their individuality. Once one has established their individuality, one must somehow hide it away from within themselves and safeguard it, so as to prevent it from being vulnerable to attack from the crowd. As agreed upon by Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard, this must be done through deceit. Dostoevsky embodied this type of deceit. For example, he deceives outsiders to believe that he was totally unaware that where he lives is a dump, that living in St. Petersburg is very expensive, and that he has no real steady job or occupation. In regard to his character, he tricks others into believing that he is rude, superstitious, bitter, and lacking in any seriousness. In fact, nothing could be further from his truth. In this way, he was able to hide his true nature, thus preventing his core self from being attacked from the outside. Kierkegaard once noted that deception that is able to succeed brings one to ecstasy. Successfully deceiving the public consists of isolating oneself and having them believe they understand the truth about that person, when in fact they know very little. In order to effectively safeguard one's individuality, one must annihilate the self to weaken the impression one makes. This allows the individual to also gain enriched observations of human life, while outsiders believe that the individual is something completely contrary to what one truly is inside. Buddhists would not be against this line of thought, as long as the individual stayed true to themselves and did not become lost in their own trickery. To be humble and to rid oneself of the ego are qualities promoted by Buddhist principles.
Whatever we do, how much you fight, just don't leave me.